Look, I know this is going to be unpopular, but hear me out. Trump just said South Africa shouldn't even be in the G's anymore because what's happened there is bad and refused to attend the G20 summit that will be held in Johannesburg. And if we're being completely honest with ourselves, he's touching on some very uncomfortable truths about South Africa's economic trajectory that we have been trying to dismiss this entire time and we thoroughly need to talk about. Strip away the inflammatory language, there is a legitimate question underneath. Does South Africa's current economic policy direction justify its seat amongst the world's top economies? The G20 represents about 85% of global GDP and two-thirds of the world's population. It's a forum for major companies to coordinate on global economic policy, trade, and financial stability. The operative word there is major economies, and that's where South Africa's position becomes increasingly difficult to defend based purely on economic merit. We call ourselves a first world country, but live like third world people. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. South Africa's economy has been stagnant or declining for years. Our GDP per capita actually fell by about 5.5% during Ramaphosa's first term. We have chronic unemployment about 30%. Load shedding has destroyed business confidence and driven away investment. Our state-owned enterprises are financial black holes. And instead of implementing pro-growth, pro-investment policies that might actually play the Uno reverse card on these trends, we continue to pursue ideological positions that actively scare away the capital we desperately need, like kill the boer and kill the farmer. Take the expropriation without compensation debate. Now, I understand the whole historical injustices and the need for land reform story. I'm not dismissing that. But from a pure investor confidence capitalist perspective, when you start talking about changing property rights for 0 rand and potentially seizing assets without compensation whatsoever, international capital will get nervous. There's no two ways about that. They'll get very nervous, in fact. It doesn't matter if no land has actually been expropriated yet under the law, which we know is not true. Bottom line is the mere existence of that policy creates uncertainty. And investors hate uncertainty more than they hate almost anything else. Trump's criticism, while hyperbolic, taps into something very, very real. South Africa has consistently chosen ideological positioning over economic pragmatism. We sued Israel at the ICJ, which was legally within our rights but economically catastrophic given US support for Israel. We've maintained close ties with Russia and China through BRICS, which again is our sovereign choice. But everything comes at a price, and that came with massive economic consequences. And especially when the US was your second biggest investor, that was the worst thing to do. The result, Trump suspended all US aid to South Africa, imposed 30% tariffs on our goods, and the NIH announced it won't provide awards to institutions that boycott Israel. The University of Cape Town lost hundreds of millions in funding. AGOA expired without renewal, devastating our automotive and agricultural sectors. The Donald Gordon Foundation pulled 200 million rand in donations. Foreign direct investment has truly plummeted. And here's the thing. We keep acting surprised by these consequences as if standing on principle exempts us from economic reality, whereas it doesn't. When you're a mid-sized economy that's still failing and that's heavily dependent on trade and foreign investment, you can't simultaneously antagonize your major trading partners and expect them to keep funding your budget and buying your exports because you're trying to be the hero. From a conservative, pro-business perspective, South Africa's economic policies over the past decade have been disastrous. We've implemented race-based economic policies through BEE that, whatever their noble intentions, have created inefficiency and corruption. We've expanded the welfare state beyond what our tax base can sustainably support. We have truly failed to access chronic government incompetence and corruption that destroys our service delivery and business confidence. We've also allowed ideology to trump economic common sense at the very turn. At every turn, in fact, no pun intended. The cadre deployment system puts politically connected people into positions they are not qualified for. State-owned enterprises like Eskom and Transnet have been looted and mismanaged into dysfunction. Our fiscal position is deteriorating, with debt to GDP rising dangerously. And instead of implementing the kind of market-friendly reforms that might attract investment and create jobs, deregulation, labor market flexibility, privatization of failing SOEs, protection of property rights, we're doubling down on policies that scare investors away. Trump's question, stripped of its inflammatory framing, is actually really reasonable. If you're going to be in the G20, you shouldn't be pursuing policies consistent with economic growth and integration into the global economy. If you're going to demand a seat at the table where major economies coordinate policy, shouldn't you be running your own economy so competently? Now, you might say, but we are the only African representative in the G20. We deserve the seat. Okay, but on what basis? Nigeria has a larger economy. Egypt has a similar GDP. The African Union recently joined as a permanent member. If the argument is continental representation rather than economic weight, then admit that's what it is. Don't pretend South Africa's economic performance justifies the seat, because we suck. The reality is that South Africa has been living off the post-apartheid goodwill and the strength of our mineral sector for decades, while systematically undermining the institutional quality and economic dynamism that might have turned us into an actual economic powerhouse. I mean, we had every advantage. Strong institutions inherited from the previous government, sophisticated financial sector, abundant natural resources, Zuma stuttering in his speeches, good infrastructure, rule of law, and we've squandered that all through incompetence, corruption, and ideological rigidity. When international investors look at South Africa now, what do they see? Unreliable electricity, crumbling rail and port infrastructure, policy uncertainty around property rights. I could go on and on. A government that prioritizes BRICS relations hips over Western economic integration, universities boycotting Israeli academics and losing hundreds of millions in funding as a result, a ruling party that's been in power for 30 years and has overseen steady economic decline while blaming apartheid for current failures. That's not an attractive investment destination. Let's just say it is a risk to be avoided. Trump's expropriation concerns, while overblown, aren't entirely unfounded. Section 25 of the Constitution was amended to allow for expropriation without compensation under certain circumstances. The expropriation bill was passed and signed into law. No, there hasn't been mass land seizures. No, there's no genocide. Or is there? But the legal framework now exists for the state to take property without paying for it, and that fundamentally undermines property rights, which are the bedrock of a market economy. From an investor perspective, why on earth would you build a factory, develop a mine, or establish a business in a country where the government has explicitly granted itself the power to seize your assets without compensation? You wouldn't. You'd go literally anywhere else. And that's exactly what's happening. Foreign direct investment into South Africa has collapsed. Companies are relocating regional headquarters to other African countries. The skilled professionals who can leave are leaving. The tax base is shrinking while the demands on it grow. We're in a death spiral of declining economic performance, leading to worse policy choices, leading to further economic decline. It's not rocket science. Trump's broader point is that South Africa's domestic and foreign policies have undermined its standing among major economies, and that is difficult to refute. We've chosen to position ourselves as a leader of the global South, aligned with BRICS and opposed to Western hegemony. I hope I said it right, while simultaneously trying to impress Western countries and their trade relationships, provide aid, and convince them to invest in our economies. You can't have it both ways. right? This is like the kid who wants both sides of the pie. No, have one piece, then give the other piece to your sibling. If South Africa is going to pursue policies antithetical to that system, like protectionism, expropriation, ideological boycotts, alignment with authoritarian states, then Trump's question becomes valid. What exactly are you doing in this forum? Get out of here. What are you doing here? I know this perspective will anger people. I know the response will be, Summer's just repeating Western imperialist talking points, or Summer doesn't understand the historical context because he's too young. But economic reality doesn't give a flying ham sandwich about your feelings or your historical grievances. They couldn't care less. Capital flows to where it's welcomed and protected. Bottom line, that's business. Business is located where they can operate efficiently and profitably, not whose grandmother was in apartheid. Investors put money into economies with clear rules, competent governance, and growth potential. South Africa, under the ANC, has progressively become none of those things, and pretending otherwise or dismissing criticism or racism or any of that, or dismissing any of that is what I mentioned, like neocolonialism, is simply undermining the fundamentals. Trump is not wrong about the refugee program. He is not wrong about his core criticism, and that is that South Africa's trajectory does not justify its place among the world's major economies. And that deserves serious consideration rather than reflexive dismissal, if you ask me. We can either honestly access where our policies are taking us and make necessary corrections, or we can continue on the current path while insisting that everyone criticizing us is all wrong and we're right, and everyone criticizing us is motivated by racism or imperialism. One of those approaches might stabilize and grow the economy. The other guarantees continued decline for our nation. The choice is yours, but if you choose wrong, you shouldn't be surprised when countries like the United States decide they've forfeited their seat at the big table when we're the hosts. Trump might be an imperfect messenger, but sometimes even the most imperfect of messengers deliver messages worth hearing. I'm not perfect, yet you watch me all the time.